I still remember the first moment I realized something was deeply wrong. It wasn't during some big fight or after a long series of red flags, it was right there. At a dinner table surrounded by glowing candles, polished silverware, and the hum of polite conversation. My son's fiancée leaned closer to one of her friends, her voice low but sharp. And in French, she said something cruel about me. She assumed I wouldn't understand. She assumed I was just the aging mother, sitting quietly at the end of the table, smiling politely and fading into the background. But the truth is, I did understand. Every word. I had spent years of my life living abroad, and the language was still tucked inside me like an old song I hadn't forgotten. The sting of her words burned in my chest, but I kept my expression calm. I didn't flinch. I didn't let her see me break. Instead, I took a slow sip of water, nodded at the chatter around me, and tucked that knowledge away where no one else could see it. In that moment, I felt something shift. It wasn't just the insult, it was the realization that there was a mask being worn in front of my son. She wasn't who she pretended to be, and I was the only one who had caught a glimpse of the truth. My heart beat faster, not just from hurt, but from suspicion. That night marked the beginning of a story I never expected to live through, a story of deception, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to protect the people you love. And to understand it, you need to know who we were and how we got here. My name is Margaret, and I'm a 62-year-old widow. I lost my husband years ago, and since then, my son David has been the center of my world. He's 35 now, successful in his career, well-liked, and yet, still a little boy in some ways. I sometimes see that softness in him, that trusting nature that made him easy to raise, but also leaves him vulnerable. When David introduced me to Claire, his fiancée, I could see immediately why he was so taken with her. She was beautiful in a quiet, polished way. Every gesture seemed rehearsed. Her words always graceful, her laugh soft and controlled. She carried herself like someone who had stepped out of an old movie, elegant and untouchable. Around others, she was flawless. Compliments flowed from her lips like silk, her manners impeccable, her smile disarming. And yet, I couldn't ignore the tiny prickle inside me. Maybe it was my years of watching people closely. Maybe it was the weight of age and experience. But I could feel there was something beneath her shine. I should explain, in my 30s. I spent almost 5 years living in Lyon. My late husband's work had taken us there, and while at first I felt out of place, the city became part of me. I learned to shop in the open markets, to sip coffee at little cafes, to laugh with neighbors in quick French. The language stuck with me. It's been decades, but it's still there, alive in me in a way most people wouldn't guess. So when Claire slipped into French at the dinner table that night, she thought she was speaking behind a curtain no one else could see through. But I heard her. I understood. And I realized just how different the woman David loved might be from the woman she really was. From the outside, we looked like a happy family, welcoming a bright young woman into our lives. But on the inside, I was starting to sense the imbalance, the way she seemed to hold the power, the way David leaned toward her approval, the way I was slowly being edged out. I didn't say anything that night. Instead, I smiled. I observed, and I tucked it all away, because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. This was just the beginning of something much larger. And that moment would come sooner than I thought, the moment I overheard a conversation that would change everything. It happened on one of those ordinary evenings, the kind you never expect to remember. Dinner had finished. The table was still cluttered with plates, and I was quietly gathering the dishes. David had gone into the living room to check something on his laptop, and Claire's phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up and slipped into the hallway, her voice dropping into that silky French. At first, I wasn't listening. I was rinsing glasses, stacking silverware, humming a tune without thinking. But then certain words caught my ear, words that no mother should ever have to hear spoken about her child. She was laughing softly, saying that once the wedding was done, she'd finally get her green card. She talked about money, about inheritance, about the life of comfort she would secure. Her tone wasn't tender or romantic, it was cold, calculated, and sharp. I froze there at the sink, water still running over my hands. Each sentence she spoke felt like a knife, peeling away the image she had so carefully painted in front of us. To David, she was the graceful, adoring fiancée. To her friends, she was a strategist, playing a role until the paperwork and the bank accounts were hers. I wanted to storm into the hallway, to shout, to drag David to the phone so he could hear the truth for himself. My heart pounded in my chest, anger and fear twisting together. But at the same time, a voice inside me whispered to stay still. What if he didn't believe me? What if confronting her too soon only drove him closer to her? So I swallowed my outrage. I dried my hands slowly, deliberately, as though nothing had happened. I carried on clearing the table, all the while trembling inside. The woman my son loved, the woman he trusted with his future, had just revealed herself as a stranger, one who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. The question burned inside me, do I tell him now? Risk everything? Or do I wait and gather proof for the first time? I felt powerless in my own home, trapped between protecting my son and the fear of losing him to her lies. In the end, I chose silence, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. If she was willing to scheme, then I would watch, listen, and uncover more. This battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. After that night at the sink, I knew I couldn't sit still. Silence had bought me time, but time alone wouldn't save David. I needed proof, hard, undeniable truth before I could confront him or risk shattering our relationship. I started small. My niece, Emily, works for a local government office. I trusted her, and I knew she'd be discreet. I called her one afternoon, framing it carefully, as though I was just curious about background checks. She listened, then quietly promised she'd see what she could do. A week later, she called back, her voice low and unsettled. The social security number Claire had given David didn't match her name. My stomach dropped. That night, I sat at my laptop, the glow of the screen painting the kitchen in cold light. I typed in everything I knew: her full name, her supposed workplace, even the names of the parents she had spoken about. What came up was a patchwork of inconsistencies. No school records, no employment history that lasted more than a year. Pictures that looked staged, like stock images passed off as family portraits. Each click pulled me deeper into a rabbit hole, and with every discovery, my unease hardened into certainty. Still, I needed more. I remembered my late husband's words, spoken years ago when we first moved back from France. Never accuse someone unless you're sure. Once the words are out, you can't take them back. I heard his voice in my head as clearly as if he were standing beside me. So, I hired a private investigator. It felt strange, almost cinematic, but I knew this wasn't paranoia. It was protection. Weeks passed, and the PI delivered a report that made my blood run cold. Multiple aliases across different states, 2 previous marriages that ended abruptly, both with men who had mysteriously drained savings accounts, a record of a staged address listed as her parents' home. But when checked, it turned out to be an empty property. And perhaps worst of all, other families, other mothers like me, who had watched their sons walk blindly into disaster. Reading those pages, I felt anger burn in my chest, but beneath it was something stronger resolve. This wasn't just about saving David from embarrassment. This was about saving him from a life shackled to a lie. I looked at Claire differently after that. Her polished smiles, her gentle touches toward David, her carefully chosen words at family dinners, they were all performance. And now, I was the audience who could see the wires pulling the puppet. But I didn't reveal my hand. Not yet. I smiled back at her, poured her a glass of wine, asked her about her wedding plans. I played along, just as she did, because I knew the right moment to strike was coming. And that moment would arrive under the glow of Christmas lights, with the entire family gathered around the table. Christmas that year glowed like a postcard. The tree shimmered with white lights, garlands hung across the mantel, and the smell of roasted ham filled the house. Laughter floated around the table as family passed plates and clinked glasses. To anyone watching, it looked like joy, but inside me, every second ticked with dread. I knew what was coming. Claire thought she was about to secure her prize. David thought he was about to propose, and I knew the truth was about to break open. I sat there, my smile steady but my heart racing, watching her. She looked radiant in red, leaning against David's shoulder, whispering in his ear as though she had already won. He had that soft glow in his eyes, the one I'd seen since childhood whenever he believed something too good to be true. My chest ached, knowing what would happen next. The moment came when David rose from his chair. He tapped his glass, nerves and excitement written all over him. My hands tightened around my napkin. I could see the small velvet box in his pocket. Claire's eyes sparkled as she glanced around, already savoring her victory. And then, before he could kneel, the front door opened. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside, flashing a badge, an immigration officer. Gasps filled the room. Forks clattered against plates. My sister-in-law froze mid-sentence, and David turned, stunned. I kept my eyes on Claire. The agent's voice was calm but firm. He laid a folder on the table, thick with documents, photos, records, testimonies. Each page was a nail in the coffin of the story Claire had built. He spoke of her aliases, her staged addresses, her history of marriage fraud, names of other men, bank accounts drained, lies layered upon lies. At first, Claire tried to keep her composure, her French accent still wrapped around her words like silk. But as the evidence stacked higher, something shifted. Her mask cracked, and then, just like that, she dropped the act. Her accent vanished. The polished grace melted away. What came out was a flat, hard American voice, sharp with anger and disdain. It was as if the person we thought we knew had evaporated, leaving only a stranger in her place. David's face broke in front of me. I saw disbelief, then denial, then the slow, crushing weight of realization. His shoulders slumped, his lips trembled, and for a long moment he couldn't even look at her or at me. I wanted to reach out, to hold him like I did when he was a little boy. But I stayed still. This was his heartbreak to feel, and mine to witness. Around the table, silence pressed down heavy. The lights twinkled, the ham grew cold, and the warmth of Christmas evaporated in an instant. Claire sat there, her eyes now icy, no longer bothering to pretend. She didn't plead, she didn't apologize because she didn't care. And that was the moment the truth lay bare. No more doubts, no more masks, just devastation, sitting like a shadow over the family I loved. The house erupted after the agent left. The festive glow of Christmas was gone, replaced by shouting, slammed doors, and stunned silence. David turned to me with eyes full of pain I had never seen before. It wasn't just heartbreak over Claire, it was betrayal from me too. He demanded to know why I hadn't told him sooner. Why I had let him fall so deeply before ripping the mask away. His voice cracked with rage, but beneath it, I could hear the broken child who once trusted me without question. I tried to explain that I needed proof, that I wanted to protect him, but my words fell flat. He couldn't hear them through the noise of his own devastation. He left that night without saying goodbye, and the sound of the front door closing echoed louder than any argument. After the guests trickled out, I stood in the living room surrounded by crumpled napkins, half-empty glasses, and the heavy silence of a ruined holiday. The tree still sparkled, mocking me with its cheerful lights, but all I felt was emptiness. I sat down alone at the table where the truth had been laid bare and pressed my hands together, wondering if I had lost my son forever. Later, when the house finally quieted, I returned to my own home. The drive was long and heavy, the streets lined with houses glowing warmly against the night, each one holding families together while mine felt fractured beyond repair. Stepping into my quiet kitchen, I felt the weight of loneliness settle over me. The chair where my husband once sat was still empty, and now I feared David's place might become empty too. I lay awake until morning, torn between guilt and resolve. I had saved him from a lifetime with a liar, but in doing so, I had cracked something fragile between us. I didn't know if time would mend it, or if this was a wound that would never fully heal. The months that followed were quiet, almost painfully so. David kept his distance, and though I wanted to reach out every day, I gave him space. I spent long evenings alone, replaying that Christmas night in my mind, wondering if I had broken something that could never be mended. Then, slowly, pieces of the truth began to surface. Investigators traced the trail of fraud, uncovering that Claire had stolen the identity of a real French woman, a woman who had no part in the deception. It turned out everything Claire presented, from her accent to her family stories, was fabricated. The real woman's innocence made the fraud even clearer, and for the first time, David began to see that I had not exaggerated or acted out of control. We didn't heal overnight. It started with small gestures, David stopping by for coffee one morning, a hesitant smile when he dropped off some mail, a text message on my birthday. Each one felt like a thread slowly weaving us back together. Over time, he allowed me back into his confidence, and we began to talk not just about what had happened, but about the lessons buried inside it. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but also the strength growing there. He had learned the hardest way possible that love without truth is a dangerous illusion. And I, in turn, had learned that even the strongest bonds can bend under pressure, but with patience, they can be reshaped. Looking back, I see resilience not as some heroic trait, but as the quiet choice to keep showing up for each other, even after the deepest wounds. Our family wasn't the same, but it was still ours, and that gave me hope. In the end, I learned that protecting the people we love isn't always about shielding them from pain. Sometimes it means letting them see the truth, even when it hurts, and trusting that they are strong enough to survive it. Families are built on love, but what keeps them together is trust and respect, and those can only exist when honesty comes first. David and I still carry the scars of what happened, but we also carry the lessons. And maybe that's what family really is, not perfection, but the willingness to keep walking forward together, even after we stumble. If you've ever faced a moment where protecting someone meant breaking their heart, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments, or pass this video on to someone who might need to hear it today. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us keep sharing stories that remind us we're not alone.